What if wealth could build every wall, except the one that keeps sorrow out? What if a man who owned half the city couldn't buy back the peace he'd sold for power? Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here each day we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. In Boston's Beacon Hill district, where the air smelled faintly of stone and old money, Marcus Miller's life looked complete. 48 years old, a financier with buildings that bore his name, a man whose reflection filled glass towers, but whose soul, if mirrored, might have vanished. The Miller Mansion stood on Mount Vernon Street, its windows like blind eyes staring at a world Marcus no longer cared to see. Inside, Helen Miller, once the heart of every dinner party, now a ghost of her former warmth, moved carefully, a woman counting her breaths. She had been coughing again, rubbing her chest where the ache had sharpened since winter. The doctor's voice still echoed in her mind, "We'll need more tests." In the courtyard stood an old statue of the Virgin Mary, its marble robes streaked gray by decades of soot and rain. Marcus had considered removing it. Too old-fashioned, he'd said. But Helen had begged softly, "Leave her. She's seen more storms than we have." He had shrugged and forgotten about it. Faith was nostalgia to him, a relic from a time before profit margins. That morning, as sunlight fell through the rain-streaked window, Marcus noticed movement near the statue. A small figure bent in concentration. A child. The girl couldn't have been more than 8. Her backpack sagged with books, her sneakers were frayed, and she held a folded rag with the care of someone holding treasure. She didn't glance toward the house or the cameras at the gate. She simply approached the statue, reached up on her toes, and began to clean. Her motions were deliberate, rhythmic, wiping away grime that had clung for years. Every so often she paused, looked up, and whispered something only the marble could hear. Then with a tiny nod, she resumed. Marcus frowned. Trespassing, clearly. But he didn't move. Something about the sight stilled him. The statue, beneath her touch, seemed to breathe again. Its cracks less harsh, its eyes less empty. When she finally finished, she folded the rag carefully and bowed her head. "Thank you for listening, Blessed Mother. I'll come again tomorrow." Then she turned toward the street. The next day, she returned, and the next, always at 3 in the afternoon, just as the church bells nearby began to ring. On the 4th day, Marcus stepped outside. His tone was sharp, though his curiosity betrayed him. "Young lady," he said, "this is private property." The girl spun around, startled but polite. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to bother anyone." "Then why are you here?" She looked at the statue, not at him. She looked sad, she murmured. No one was taking care of her. Marcus blinked. "It's just stone." The girl hesitated, then added softly, "My name's Sarah. And no, sir, it isn't just stone. She's listening." Her words clung to him longer than he cared to admit. That evening, Helen winced again, pressing her hand against her ribs as she sat on the sofa. The ache came faster now, like an uninvited guest. Marcus poured himself a drink, pretending not to notice. But his eyes betrayed him. They kept drifting toward the window. The statue gleamed faintly under the porch light. The stains were nearly gone. The Virgin's face, though carved from stone, seemed to hold something new, not expression exactly, but presence. "Who's that girl?" Helen asked, following his gaze. "Just some kid from the parish school, I think. Keeps cleaning the statue every day." Helen's lips curved weakly. "Then she has a kinder heart than most adults I know." He didn't answer. He only stared at the marble figure, silent and patient, as if it knew something he didn't. That night, Marcus dreamed of water trickling down marble, of a child's hands moving in circles, of a pale face half seen through mist.
sorrow without words. He woke unsettled, his pillow damp with sweat. The next afternoon, Sarah returned. Marcus was already waiting. "Why do you do this?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah looked up, sunlight catching her uneven braids. "Because someone's sick," she said simply, "and the lady told me to pray for her." Marcus stiffened. "Who is sick?" "I don't know her name, but she lives here." His throat tightened. "How could you possibly know that?" Sarah tilted her head. "The lady told me. She said her hands hurt, and her heart." Marcus stood frozen, unable to reply. Inside, behind the curtains, Helen shifted on the couch, rubbing her chest again. Later that evening, Marcus found her asleep with a rosary tangled in her fingers, a thin silver chain he hadn't seen in years. "Where did that come from?" he asked. She smiled faintly without opening her eyes. "Your mother's drawer. I thought maybe it's time to try praying again." He didn't speak. He only sat beside her, his hand hovering near hers, but not yet daring to touch. Outside, Sarah had finished her daily ritual. As she turned to leave, she glanced toward the window, sensing eyes upon her. The statue behind her now shone softly, its marble robe catching the last light of the setting sun. A magnolia petal, out of season, floated down from nowhere and rested in Mary's open palm. Sarah smiled. "Thank you for listening."
Through the glass, Marcus heard the faint echo of her voice. He reached for Helen's hand, this time holding it tightly. Her pulse trembled under his thumb. Peace or fear? He couldn't tell. But for the first time in years, he didn't reach for his phone. He just sat there, listening to the silence, the wind, and perhaps to something that was listening back. It rained again the next day, steady, gray, and relentless. The kind of rain that made even clocks seem slower. From his study window, Marcus watched the courtyard blur into silver. He didn't expect anyone to appear in that weather. But right on time, 3 o'clock, a small umbrella wobbled into view, fighting the wind. Sarah had returned. She knelt before the statue, her knees sinking into the soaked soil, and began to wipe the marble shoulders with a rag. Each movement was deliberate, tender, like a ritual learned long ago. The rain fell harder, but she didn't flinch. Marcus opened the door, rain splattering across his polished shoes. "Sarah, you shouldn't be out here. You'll get sick." She looked up, startled, her hair clinging to her face. Then she smiled, calm as ever. "I promised her I'd come every day," she said simply. Her umbrella trembled in the wind. She pressed it tighter to her shoulder, almost protectively over the statue. Marcus frowned. "You don't have to, you know." "I know," she said softly, "but some promises matter more than comfort." Behind them, Helen appeared at the doorway, her shawl pulled tight. The color had returned faintly to her face. "Let her be, Marcus," she said, her voice thin but steady. "There's something in that kind of faith we shouldn't interrupt." Sarah smiled at her. "She said the lady inside would laugh again soon." Helen blinked. "What did you say?" But the girl only turned back to her task as if she hadn't spoken at all. Helen's hand rose to her chest where the ache had lived for months. For a moment, it eased. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The rain tapped at the windows like knuckles on a coffin lid. The image of Sarah, small, soaked, and serene, haunted him. He poured a glass of whiskey, but the sound of pouring rain drowned even that. Then, faintly, came the chime. He frowned. The wind chimes had been taken down months ago. When he stepped outside,
Cold air slapped his face. Nothing moved, only the statue gleaming faintly under the lantern. Then he smelled it. Magnolia. Rich, sweet, alive. A single petal lay at Mary's feet, luminous as ivory. He went back inside, silent. Helen stirred awake, her breath shallow. "I dreamed of her," she whispered. "The woman from the painting in my mother's room. Blue veil, eyes like winter." Marcus didn't reply. He poured the rest of his whiskey down the sink. The next afternoon, Sarah came again. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it. Wet earth and something floral that shouldn't have survived the season. Marcus watched her from the window, then from the porch, then, before realizing it, from behind the gates. When she left, curiosity, or something sharper, pulled him after her, past the gates he seldom opened. He followed her through narrow streets where puddles mirrored broken windows. She turned into an alley lined with leaning brick houses and slipped into one whose door hung crooked. He hesitated before knocking. The air smelled of soap and boiled cabbage. A woman opened the door. Her face was tired, lined, but kind. "Mr. Miller?" she said, startled. "Sarah told me about you." He nodded. "I just wanted to thank her." The woman's smile wavered. "She doesn't do it for thanks. She prays for her brother. He's at St. Luke's, paralyzed since the accident. Doctors say, well, they say there's nothing left to do." Marcus lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry." "She says the Virgin will help, and that the prayers need to be said where the light touches the statue." He didn't understand what that meant, but somehow he didn't doubt it either. That evening, Helen insisted on going outside with Sarah. The courtyard was still damp, the air cool. Sarah knelt again before the statue, her hands clasped, whispering words too soft to catch. Helen touched the marble, tracing the folds of the Virgin's robe. "She looks like she's waiting," she murmured. "She is," Sarah nodded. "For what?" Sarah didn't answer, only bowed her head deeper. Helen hesitated and then whispered, "I don't remember how to pray anymore." Sarah looked up. "Just talk to her. She understands before you even start." Helen's lips parted. "Then maybe that's enough." The wind shifted, cool, fragrant. The magnolia tree behind them shivered, though no storm approached. Helen's fingers brushed the marble. A pulse of warmth, brief as sunlight through clouds, passed under her skin, gone before she could name it. Her breath caught. She began to whisper, "Hail Mary, full of grace." Sarah joined softly, the rhythm like a heartbeat between them. "Pray for us now and at the hour of our—" A sudden wind ripped through the courtyard, scattering leaves and ash. The lantern flickered violently, and somewhere inside the house, a window shattered. Helen gasped, clutching her chest. Marcus ran toward her, shouting her name. But the final word, death, was swallowed by the storm. The rain came again, wild, cleansing, relentless. When silence returned, the courtyard glistened. The statue stood untouched. Helen lay faint, but breathing, her pulse steady. Sarah was on her knees beside her, whispering something into the air. The scent of magnolia lingered, thick, impossible. Marcus dropped to one knee in the mud, rain mixing with something saltier on his face. He didn't pray, he just stayed there, head bowed beneath the gaze of the Virgin, as if waiting for something to move.
The morning after the storm, the air felt heavy but alive, the kind of silence that comes after something sacred has passed. Helen slept late for the first time in months. When she finally woke, her voice was stronger, her skin no longer pale but flushed with the faint pink of returning life. Marcus couldn't explain it. Doctors had told him her heart was failing, that each morning she woke was already a borrowed miracle. But that day, she rose, asked for breakfast, and even laughed when the kettle whistled. It was Sarah who came knocking again, her shoes still damp from the puddles. She said it wasn't the end yet, the girl said, shyly holding out a handful of magnolia petals, fresh, white, and warm to the touch. Marcus wanted to ask who she meant, but the words stuck in his throat. He had been a man of contracts and logic, raised on numbers, not novenas. Yet something in that child's calm frightened him more than the storm itself. That afternoon, he found Helen standing in the courtyard, staring at the statue as though seeing it for the first time. "The cracks are gone," she whispered. He looked closer. She was right. The fine hairline fractures from years of rain and sun had vanished, as if the marble had healed itself overnight. He wanted to believe it was the light, the angle, the residue of rainwater, but deep down, he knew better. Helen reached out, fingertips trembling. "I don't know what happened, but something changed inside me." Sarah appeared again that evening, her skirt still muddy, her eyes too old for her face. She sat quietly at the foot of the statue, humming a tune Marcus had never heard, something ancient, almost liturgical. "Where do you live, Sarah?" Helen asked. "Near the river," the girl replied, "where the water used to reach the church steps before they built the wall." Helen nodded, as if she understood more than she should have. When Marcus walked her out, he couldn't resist asking, "Why do you keep coming here?" Sarah looked at him. Not like a child, but like someone who'd already heard that question 100 times and had learned not to answer. Instead, she said softly, "Because she listens, even when you don't think she does." Then she turned down the street and disappeared behind the mist that still lingered after the rain. The days that followed were strange, almost suspended in time. Helen's health improved steadily. The doctors were baffled. "Whatever you're doing," one of them said, half smiling, "keep doing it." But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the warmth that had passed through Helen's hand, or the way Sarah's words had echoed the rhythm of the Hail Mary. One evening, while Helen rested, he went outside. The courtyard was still, moonlight falling on the statue's face. He knelt, awkwardly, like a man out of practice, and whispered, "If this is real, if you're listening, show me what to do." The only answer was the sound of the wind through the magnolia leaves. Yet for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. He didn't notice the small envelope tucked at the statue's base until morning. Inside was a note written in a child's hand. "For the lady who laughed again. She said it's not over yet." No name, just a faint scent of rain. Later that week, Helen and Marcus went to find Sarah. They followed the address her mother had mentioned, a narrow row house by the river, roof sagging, paint peeling, but when they arrived, the door was padlocked. An old man across the street looked up from his porch. "You looking for the girl?" "Yes," Marcus said, "Sarah." The man shook his head. "Ain't no one there for months. The lady passed in February. Heart condition." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "The daughter? She was taken in by the sisters at St. Anne's orphanage. Poor thing." Helen pressed her hand to her chest. "St. Anne's?" she whispered. "That's where my mother volunteered." They thanked the man and left, but the ride home was silent, the kind of silence heavy with unanswered questions. When they reached the house, the courtyard door was swinging open. Wind stirred the curtains inside. Helen gasped, "Marcus, look!" The statue was wet again, though no rain had fallen.
Drops glistened under the eyes, not from the sky, but from within the stone itself. Marcus touched one. It was warm, salty. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Helen whispered, "She's crying." And for the first time since the storm, Marcus didn't try to find an explanation. He simply knelt beside his wife, hands trembling, and joined her in prayer. No lightning this time, no sound of thunder, just stillness, deep and alive, as if the very air listened. Later, when Helen fell asleep, Marcus sat by her bedside, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest. He didn't believe in miracles, not before. But that night, when he looked through the window and saw the statue gleaming softly under the moonlight, he realized belief wasn't something that arrived with proof. It came with surrender.
It rained again 3 nights later, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that remembers. Every drop fell slow, deliberate, like the ticking of an unseen clock. Marcus stood at the window, sleepless, his reflection ghosted over the glass. Outside, the Virgin statue glistened under the lamplight, unmoved, serene, rain sliding down her face in delicate silver trails. Something compelled him to step out. No umbrella, no shoes, just the sound of the world washing itself clean. The air smelled of magnolia and candle wax, and something else, faint but unmistakable, like the hush before prayer. He crossed the courtyard. The statue's marble face seemed different tonight, not weeping, not glowing, just watching. Drops formed on her lashes, too slow to be rain. They trembled, gathered, and fell to her robe like sorrow taking shape. Marcus's whisper cracked the silence. Why her? Why us? Lightning flared, gold, not white. The world froze, and in that suspended breath, he thought he heard singing. A child's hum, fragile, circling him in the rain. He turned toward the sound. A small figure stood beyond the gate, soaked and motionless, white dress clinging to her frame. "Sarah?" His voice barely rose. She didn't move, only lifted a hand, pointing toward the statue. In her other hand, the faint glint of beads, a rosary, glimmering with rain. Another flash, and she was gone. Inside, Helen was awake. She was trembling, eyes glassy with something between awe and fear. "I saw her," she whispered before Marcus could speak. "Sarah?" Helen shook her head slowly. "No, her." Her voice thinned to a tremor. She stood at the foot of the bed, rosary beads catching the lamp like stars. She smiled and cried, both at once. Marcus's throat closed. What did she say? Helen's gaze dropped to her hands. "Nothing, but I felt it, like forgiveness you can touch." The next morning, the rain had stopped. When Marcus stepped into the courtyard, a single petal, white, bruised, clung to the Virgin's hand. At her feet lay a rosary, tangled and glistening. Helen's was still beside her bed. Later that day, Marcus drove to St. Anne's orphanage. The hall smelled of old wood and lemon polish. He waited as Sister Miriam checked the records, then followed her down a narrow hallway. She stopped at a wall of faded photographs. Marcus's breath caught. There, smiling, missing a front tooth, was the girl. Beneath her picture, Sarah Whitmore, 2019 to 2023. A small brass plaque read, "Our Little Prayer." Sister Miriam's voice softened. She used to polish the chapel statue every afternoon, said the lady liked to shine for people who forgot to look. Marcus stepped closer, fingertips hovering over the frame. "She was here," he murmured, "at our home." The nun nodded gently, not as one surprised, but as one who understands. Then perhaps she still is. That night, Marcus told Helen everything. The orphanage, the photo, the plaque. Helen listened without interrupting, her hand tracing slow circles on her blanket. "She came back," Helen said finally. "Not for the statue, for us." Marcus swallowed hard. Maybe she wasn't alone. The room fell silent. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains. It smelled faintly of magnolia and something warmer, like oil from a candle's wick. By morning, the story had spread. A weeping statue in a quiet neighborhood. Photographs, crowds, priests, scientists, they all came, collecting samples, setting up lights, whispering hypotheses. Nothing explained the warm, saline tears that wouldn't dry. A young seminarian lingered after the cameras left. He approached the statue reverently, his cassock damp with dew. "My mother prayed a lifetime for one tear like this. May I?" Marcus nodded. The young man held out a small vial, caught one falling drop, and crossed himself. When he looked up again, there was peace on his face, the kind that didn't need proof. That evening, Helen sat near the window, rosary in her lap, voice thin but steady as she prayed. Marcus stood behind her, watching as light from the last candle flickered across the statue's face. The marble no longer wept, yet the air still felt alive, trembling, holy. He touched the Virgin's hand, cool under his fingers, and whispered, "Thank you." Dawn broke slow and golden. The first ray caught her face, eyes rising, greeting the sun. Helen smiled in her sleep, and outside, the magnolia trees began to bloom, though winter had not yet ended.
Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade. Newspapers called it the Whitmore phenomenon. Anchors debated it on late-night TV. Scientists mentioned humidity, mineral residue, surface condensation. But none of them had stood there. None had smelled the magnolia in the air. None had felt the silence that fell around the statue, as if the world itself were kneeling. At St. Anne's Parish, the crowd had thinned, but devotion remained. Each morning, before sunrise, Marcus walked across the courtyard. The dew glazed the stones like glass. The statue of the Virgin stood in its usual place, still, pale, motionless. But something in the air had changed. It wasn't what people saw, it was what they felt. Candles flickered, even when the wind pressed hard. Handwritten prayers, some smudged by rain, clung stubbornly to the marble base. For my son, for my faith, for one more chance. Helen often joined him, her steps slower, but her voice steadier. She would press her hand against the Virgin's robe, eyes closed, whispering, "For her, for Sarah." The ache in her chest no longer frightened her. If pain was a reminder that she was still alive, then perhaps that too was mercy. One humid afternoon, a letter arrived. Cream paper, edges warped from moisture. It bore no return address, only a wax seal stamped with a lily. Inside, in careful cursive, were words that stopped Marcus mid-breath. "We have a statue too. It stood through the fire. She never burned. Is it the same lady? St. Mary's Parish, Florida." Helen read over his shoulder. "Maybe she's reminding us," she whispered. "Grace travels faster than disaster." Her hand lingered on his, cool, fragile. And for the first time since Sarah's passing, Marcus smiled. He pinned the letter beside their daughter's photo, under a small wooden cross, and below it, in his own trembling handwriting, he wrote 3 words: "She shines still." Weeks later, the bishop arrived, unannounced, without the press. He had survived Katrina years ago. His parish then had been swept away. When he entered the courtyard, he removed his shoes,
the way one does on holy ground. He didn't speak. He simply knelt before the Virgin and wept. He knelt before the Virgin and wept. That night, in his private journal, he wrote, "Ex mea experienza, non naturale." From my own experience, not natural. He closed the notebook and said softly to his aide, "Let the people decide. Their hearts are the truest tribunal." The diocese made no public proclamation. The Vatican didn't intervene. And yet across the world, photos of the Whitmore statue spread, passed through quiet corners of faith. Soldiers in far-off bases printed them. Nurses taped them beside hospital beds. People said the Virgin's eyes seemed alive, weary, watching, patient. By early spring, the garden bloomed again. Helen and Marcus reopened their gates, not for pilgrims, not for spectacle, but for neighbors. They didn't charge, didn't advertise, they simply left the latch unfastened. And old fisherman came first, his hands still smelling of salt. He left his net by the statue's feet and murmured, "She caught what I couldn't, my courage." Later, a teenage girl from Baton Rouge arrived, tying a faded purple ribbon to the fence. For Mama, who didn't make it through Katrina. A young nurse in scrubs placed a folded note at the base. For my father, who forgot how to pray. By nightfall, the courtyard glowed like a lantern, hundreds of candles trembling in the dusk. No one spoke. They didn't have to. The silence was prayer enough. One night, Marcus found Helen asleep by the window, rosary between her fingers, candle nearly gone. Her breathing was shallow but peaceful. He didn't wake her, he just watched, memorizing the quiet rise and fall of her chest. For the first time since the hurricane, he felt no fear, only awe. He turned toward the statue. The moonlight fell through the blinds, breaking into thin beams across the marble. Near the Virgin's hand, something shimmered. Not wetness, not illusion, but a radiance that pulsed softly, steady as breath. Beneath it, a camellia bud had opened during the night, white as bone, delicate as forgiveness. The bush it came from had long been dead. Marcus knelt. He didn't analyze, didn't speak. He simply watched. Some things, he thought, were never meant to be studied, only received. At dawn, Helen awoke to the faint scent of magnolia. She rose slowly, the light tracing the wrinkles of her face, each one a story. "Do you think she's still here?" she asked quietly. Marcus took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Maybe she never left." She smiled, tears blurring her sight. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. For a moment, he thought he heard laughter carried with it, faint, childlike, echoing across the garden. Not haunting, not sad, simply alive. He looked back at the statue. The sun had reached her face. Her eyes, carved of stone, seemed to catch the light just right, lifting, as if greeting the morning. People would come and go, candles would melt, and letters would fade, but the story, like faith itself, would endure. Because some miracles do not ask for belief. They wait patiently until we are ready to see.